morning, everybody. Thanks for being here so early. Hope you've had a good conference so far. And I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Paul Hacker. I'm a solution architect with Agile Thought. If you'd like to know more about Agile Thought or what we do, see me afterwards. I'm also a Microsoft ALM MVP, which means Microsoft recognizes me in the ALM, or Application Lifecycle Management space. And today we're going to talk about Agile planning tools. So before we get started, I'd like to ask a couple questions. How many people are working with TFS either 2013 or 2015? Just a couple, yeah. Who's on 2013? Do you guys, anybody on you're on 2015? You really? Okay. Which? Oh, 13? Okay. Okay, great. Is most people aware that 2015 RTM this week? Or I should say last week, late last week. And so we're going to look at the planning tools with one of the latest versions of 2013. We're going to also look at 2015 and how it differs. And I'll probably show, if the wireless is good, I'll show Visual Studio Online, which is constantly updated. So in case you're not sure, the model that Microsoft uses, every 3 weeks the online version of Visual Studio gets updated. They do 3-week sprints, and so every 3 weeks there's new features, bug fixes, whatever coming out. On premises, they come out every quarter. So right now they just released, along with the TFS 2015 RTM, they released 2013 Update 5. And so we're going to look at, I tried to put Update 5 on my image, but it got a little wonky and I didn't want to ruin the demo, so I'm going to stick with Update 4 for today, but I'll show you Visual Studio 2015 and the Update 4. Update 5 didn't bring too much that you'd be missing anything. So with that, let's get started. I'd like to talk about setting up and going through a sprint, basically. How do you run a sprint with TFS? And let's dive into that and look at it. So some of the things we're going to look at is putting together what they call a project team in TFS. You can have one-to-many project teams. Then we're going to plan a release. We'll do things like, groom the backlog, things like that. Then we'll plan an iteration. Take those, groomed items and push them into a sprint or an iteration. Then we'll actually run through that iteration and then complete an iteration. So with Microsoft's, I think it started in about 2013. They came up with this idea of teams, where it really took on took a hold. Was they had this idea of project teams, and so what a project team is basically a way for you to group your individuals in a TFS project collection that. You can then assign different people to the teams, and you can have multiple teams per project. So that way then, if I have a database team and a web UI team and a middle tier team, I can divide those teams up in TFS, and I can assign their work accordingly. So teams can see their own stuff. You can have, again, sub-teams based off of that, and you can share those resources across teams in the same project. So I can share resources across my database team and my web UI team or my middle tier team. And so some of the details about a particular team are, when you create a team, it defines what they call an area path. And an area path in TFS is just a classification of the work items that get assigned out to individuals. So if I create a database team and a web UI team, I can decide at that time whether or not I want an area path associated with that particular team. So when I create work in the work item tracking system, I can assign it to that particular area or that particular team. They can have separate iterations if they'd like, or they can use the same iterations. So that means each team can be really autonomous. In fact, that maybe the database team runs 2-week sprints while the UI team runs 3-week sprints. You can do that now by setting up the teams correctly. Or again, you can share the same iterations. Members see only their charts and builds and things like that. So it's very closed up for, you don't have to worry about people seeing across multiple teams and seeing other people's stuff. It's per team. Again, we can manage different capabilities, we can manage capacity, we can manage all this information that we'll go through at a team level. And that's really how we want to do it. The one thing it doesn't offer you is a roll-up of everything across all teams. So if I want to see, because teams can be autonomous and have different types of iterations details, it doesn't roll up everything automatically, and so you can see a high overview of all the teams at one time on where they're at. But the reporting mechanism in TFS allows you to report against that, so you can create some SSRS or some Excel reports that will give you that information. It's all stored in a SQL database in the back end anyway, so the information's there, we just have to query for it. Again, each team can have its own administrator, and you can have your own permissions as to what team members can do and see. And you also have this idea of alerting mechanism. So TFS, if you're familiar, has a notification mechanism when people check in, when a build fails, things like that. It will send out an email to individuals. Well, with 2013, they decided to start implementing this thing called team alerts rather than individual alerts. The individual alerts are still there, but now you can actually notify your team. So I want my team to know that the build failed. I don't want every person to have to go and subscribe to that particular alert. I want to assign that alert to my team as an administrator and make sure everybody's aware that the build fails. You know, everybody's notified immediately, and so that's what team alerts do. Again, there are individual alerts you can sign up for, and there's a couple that we'll talk to that I think are really important, especially a work item alert for when work's assigned out to you. That's always a good alert to sign up for. So let's, we're going to jump back and forth. I don't always like to jump back and forth, but I think for this one we're going to. And let's take a look at this is 2013. It says update 3, but it's really not. It's update 4. So, oh, you're not seeing anything. There we go. Everything we're going to do today is going to be based off the web version of TFS. So you don't need Visual Studio installed on your machine to do most of the stuff we're going to do today. In fact, I don't think there's really any reason you need to have Visual Studio on your machine to do what we're going to do. Again, we're talking about Agile planning, and usually Scrum Masters or product owners, they don't care about Visual Studio. They just want to go in and be able to manage their project. So we're going to use the web for all of the work we're going to do. This is the home page for my particular project. In fact, here I'm using a project called Tailspin Toys. It's a Microsoft provided VM that has data and everything in it, so I can go in and, if you've not heard of it, we'll talk about it later. But I'm in this project, and right here you can see we have our backlog and our task board and things like that. And then on these other links, we have things like configure our schedule and our iterations and our work areas. We also have over here our little gear. This takes us into an administration window. You need the administration permissions in order to be able to manage your teams. So when your project is set up, somebody's going to give an individual or individuals permissions to do this type of stuff. Once you have those permissions, you go to that gear, and this is where you can set up things like your iterations, your alerts we talked about, but most of all, your teams. So it's very easy. I can create a new team. We can call this new team B. Down here you can give it a little description. What type of permissions should this team have? So maybe this is an administration team and you can give them administrator permissions. Or maybe it's a build team. Most of the time they're contributors. Contributors are your typical developer, person that's going to go in and work with TFS, work with Visual Studio. So contributor is what defaults to. They'll have enough permissions to do most of the planning work they need to do. But again, you can set those permissions accordingly. Down here is where we create that area path or name for that with the name of the team. So what I'm saying here is when I create this team, I also want you to go out and create that area path for me, that classification path, and I want you to name it New Team B. Okay? I can actually choose not to select that, and I can assign an area path to it later on if I want to. But normally I leave it as a default. There we have our team. We click on our team. We can go in here and start adding members to our team, whether they be Windows members or TFS groups. So the best way to manage your permissions in TFS is to manage it through AD groups. and then assign those AD groups to either TFS groups or to teams. So in here I would actually go in and assign a Windows group that I'd have set up in AD, and I'd manage my users through AD. I don't want to manage individual users in TFS. It's really not the best practice, and it's a nightmare if that person leaves your organization, because you can remove them from AD, but they still exist in TFS. If you're managing them through the AD groups, you don't have that problem. We also have settings, so you can decide when this team does their work. Is this a weekend team? Is it a weekday team? Do they work part of the week, part of the weekend? So you can set that up here too. Once I have that all set up, I can go back to here. And one of the next things I want to do is, once I've set up my team, is I want to start looking at my areas and my iterations to get that stuff set up before I can actually do anything. Because without putting dates and times and building out iterations and areas, can't really assign work to those areas or iterations. So I'm going to click on the schedules and iterations, and by default it gives me a few out of the box when I created the project, called iteration 1, 2, and 3. Again, you can change those names. You can do delete them, you can choose to open them, give it a new name, set dates and times around them, what's its location, in terms of where does it exist in here, because it could be a child of an iteration or it could be something else, and usually it's just the project name. Here's where we can go in and set our dates for our iteration. Once we have all our dates set, we check the boxes for the ones we want to show up in TFS. So when we go back in and we start to look at the backlog and look at the task board and those types of items, only the boxes that are checked will then come and be shown in that task board or in the backlog. What's nice about that is that I can plan as a planner. Again, I'm planning my project. I can plan multiple iterations ahead and only show teams what I expect them to work on, and for like maybe the current, the last, and the next one will be the only ones I show them at this time. And again, I can add by selecting here, I can add a new child, add a new iteration. We can call it iteration 4. And select a date around that. We'll select the, yep. So one of the things you'll notice here is when I click on this, it automatically goes to the 18th. It knows that my last sprint ended on the 17th. So I'll select the 18th, and it already knows that I'm running 1 week sprints here, so it's going to pre-fill my dates for me. And there it is set up. And then again, I can check the box or not. The other thing is the work areas. So again, these are my classifications. There's my team, my team B that I created, and then I have a website, a database, business logic area. Again, I can decide for this particular area of the project. I'm in the Tailspin Toys section here. I can decide what is the area for that, and I'm going to say it's the Tailspin Toys root. Now I can go down here and I can browse all, and you can see I can go to switch to my team B, or I can switch to my team A, and those will then change, and we'll just navigate to those. There's nothing in them right now, but we'll just navigate to them, and it gives you a whole new interface, because each team has their own dashboard they're going to work with. So they'll have what we call, they'll have the ability to manage their own iterations, their own areas within their team, their own backlog, their own task board, their own queries, all their own information, and they'll see it driven here based on what they're doing as a team, and this is Team B. One of the things I also like to bring up is this new Team Room B room. A team room is a way within Visual or TFS, I should say, that allows you to do instant messaging within the application. But it does more than just instant messaging. It'll actually, we'll go in there, there's nothing in there, but it allows you to see who's in the room. It allows you to add messages to the room. It'll actually track bills, check-ins, all that information can be tracked in the room. And you can go back and forth through the date picker and see, what happened on the previous day. Oh, I want to go back to yesterday because I know that, Susie did something in TFS. I want to go see what that was, or I want to go see about that change that she checked in, and I don't remember the number. I can go back and look that way. So we'll go back to Tailspin Toys. So that's pretty much setting up the areas, the iterations, and your teams. Once that's all set up, then we can go to start looking at doing running a sprint. So let's go back to here. Actually, no, we don't want to go back to there. We want to go back to here. No. All right, and so next we'll talk about planning the release. When we start planning a release, we actually start to look at the backlog and we start to do what we call evolve the backlog. We start to add user stories or PBIs or product backlog items. Just depends on what you chose as your template for TFS, whether you're using Scrum, whether you're doing just Agile, or whether you're doing CMMI Waterfall. Scrum will have the PBIs or product backlog items, Agile will have the user stories, and CMI will have the requirements. Again, this is a list owned by the product owner. And so, again, this is not something that's specific to TFS, but it's more of an industry standard, is that, product owners own backlogs. And people get confused as to, well, who's going to prioritize my work? It's the product backlog owner. They get with the business tells them what's the business value to them. They go in and they say, okay, based on what you're telling us, this is what we're going to work on. And they prioritize that backlog for you. Now, again, that's just the backlog. That's the product backlog, not to be confused with a sprint backlog, which we'll look at next. And again, it's written from a user's perspective. So one of the typical ways to write a user story or a PBI is, as a user, as an auditor, I want to be able to enter, mathematics into the application so I can get a result. And that's how it's usually written. And as a user, I want to do something to get a certain result. And that's how you should write your user stories if you're following, again, the best practices. So let's flip back to there and take a look at that. That's new team B. I don't want to go to new team B. I want to go back to here and take a look at our backlog. So there's our backlog. You don't see our backlog. Why does it keep changing on me? I'm just going to stay in here in the demo, I think. All right, we're going to just stay in the demo. There's the backlog. As you can see, we have user stories in there already. Again, as a type of user, I want to do some goal so that I can get something out of results. So as a customer, I should be able to remove items from my shopping cart. It's very simple. It's assigned to an individual. It has a state, and it has story points. We assign story points to every user story to give it some kind of effort. Now, people get confused. Should my story points be hours? I want to use hours. Normally, if you're following best practices, story points are an effort. It's a Fibonacci sequence. It's t-shirt sizing. It's small, medium, large. It's some way for you to tell how big is this thing that we want to work on. And that's really all it is. It's a gauge. Like I said, a lot of people want to use particular hours. And again, story points can equate to hours. So I've worked in organizations where a story point equates to 3 to 5 hours. So 2 story points are, 6 to 10 or 10 to whatever hours. 1 story point's 3 to 5, 2's 10 to or 5 or 6 to 10, 3 is 11 to whatever, and so on and so forth. But again, we don't care about the hours right here, right now, because when we go to track our hours, we're not tracking them on stories, we're tracking them on tasks associated to the stories. I can very easily start adding user stories here. And it's just going to add the user story into the list wherever my cursor was. So at that time, my cursor was down here. Why can't you save my changes? Okay, that's okay. Interesting. Let's refresh. The other thing you'll see is that the current iteration path for all these is in the backlog. I have an iteration called backlog. That's where I put all of my particular stories that are not associated with a given sprint or iteration. Again, what I can do then is I can start to look at these things, and I'll sit down with the business, and the business will tell me, Certain things are more important than other things, so I think that as an administrator I should be able to cancel or modify an open order. That's really important to me, more important than the rest of this stuff. So I'm just going to drag it up here, and of course you're going to throw me an error. Is the clock wrong? Maybe the clock is wrong here. Let me adjust the time real quick here. Something's going on with my clock. Yeah, I know. That's because the image is set like that. There it goes. There it goes. Now let's refresh and try it again. Probably going to mess up my iterations now. Okay, but you get what I'm saying here, is that the nice thing about this is as I'm talking to them, I can go in here and I can drag and drop what I want to do, how I want to prioritize this. And this is all in a prioritized order. So that way then I go in here and I know that this is the order in which things need to be done. So as a team, I'm going to go in here, and when I sit down with my Scrum Master and developers, and we're going to look at this and we're going to say, okay, these are the particular things that are going to get worked on. Now, the product owner is going to go out here and say, okay, I know that my team has things like, let's forecast, for example, velocity. So by clicking on forecast, I turn on this velocity. Velocity is the amount of effort I can get done in a particular sprint or iteration. So if I give it 2 story points, I should be able to give a couple more things into my iteration, because I got a total of 10 effort, 10 velocity. And that's what that equates to, is the effort that your story points that you put into that particular story. So if I change this to 6, for example, let's see if something changes. No, you're not going to play nice with me, are you? But what it'll do is it'll say, for these particular iterations, here's what I think you can do in the next iteration. Now my velocity is 10 and this one's 9, so this is the only one it's going to select and say, I believe that in this iteration you're going to be able to do just this particular work item. So we'll just drag that work item over to we'll turn the forecasting back off again. We'll drag that particular story over to the iteration. And now you notice it's at iteration 2. So now I've assigned my particular work item to iteration 2. If my velocity was a little higher, I could drag more over there, and I'm going to drag a few over there just for the sake of the demo. But again, you can track all that through your forecasting. You can also, one of the things with 2013 you can do is hide work items that are in progress. So you can see here I'm showing everything. These are all the iteration 1s. I don't care about any of that stuff. It's done, it's before, let's hide it. And so that's what that gives you the ability to do there. I can also choose to view how I want to view my backlog. So I can view it by either stories to features, so because we have a feature and we have a story and then a task, or I can do it story to tasks. So there I can see it's my story to tasks, and I can collapse them all down, and I can see which ones have tasks already associated to them. Again, I can do it just stories to, or stories to features. You'll see up here features. This is where I can go in and add features. Features are high level, a little higher than a story. This is customizable. By doing a little configuration with some XML in the command line, you can actually go in and change this. So I know companies that go in, they'll put initiatives, goals, features, stories, tasks, defects, bugs, and so they'll add all that stuff in here. And you can do that. So again, it depends how deep you need to go as an organization. They start you with features, you can do the rest from there. One of the other things I can do is show what I want, see what I want in the columns here. Because they are color coded, stories are blue, I don't necessarily need to show the work item type in the selected columns anymore. It used to be by default it was in there, and it took up a lot of room, because if I add it, you can see it'll take up room over here, and it'll kind of squish everything in. The more you add, the more it goes. But we don't need to do that anymore, because we have color coding, but you can add it in if you'd like. The other thing we have is the board. And the board is basically a task board, or some people use it as a Kanban board. Kanban is just another way to manage your project, or to set your items up in your project. You can customize your columns in your board. So for my iterations, how do I want my board to look? I want to have active, I want to have resolved, and I want to have closed. And these are the states they're associated with. And this is what we call the WIP limit. WIP limits are called work in progress limits. So how much work can exist in that column before I start to flag the team that, hey, you need to take some action on the work in this column. You either need to do the work, you need to get it out of the column, move it to maybe add another column, and a lot of times what we do is we'll add a column and we'll call it blocked, because a lot of times things do get blocked and you don't know where to put them. And we'll call it active. Select OK. And now we have our blocked column. Again, we can set the work item limits to whatever we want, so maybe I would say we can have 7 blocked items at a time and that's it, maybe less. But you'll notice here that the resolved, if you can kind of tell, is a little red compared to the rest. What it's telling me is I have 7 work items in this column, my limit is 5, we need to take some action on these right now. You know, so maybe we're going to take some of Julia's stuff and we're going to move it over here and get ourselves back to a more stable state. Maybe they are blocked. Or maybe it is we need to work on them and we just need to get going. Sometimes we'll add a column called in progress, so we can drag our work to in progress. Not only is it active because it's been approved, but maybe it's in progress because we were physically working on it at this time. So once we've gone through and prioritized the backlog, once we've set up our board, once we've set up everything else and we've added things to our iteration, added items to our iteration, we can now go into our iteration and take a look at what's currently in there. And this is where I can go in and start to decipher the work items and break them down. So I'm going to just take one that's already broken down for the sake of time. And we're going to take a look at it real quick. So as a customer, I should be able to remove items from my shopping cart. Well, I can see that there's 4 links associated with that, which means there's 2 tasks, 2 test cases. I can see the tasks. I'm going to open one of those tasks up. And this is where I start to go in and prioritize the task, give it a title, assign it out to the individual. So as the development team now, we're going through this work item, this user story, and we're saying, okay, we need to design the UI for this removal item. And we're going to assign it to Annie because she's a great UI person. Again, our team is cross-functional in terms of they're not only UI people, but they're also database and developers and things like that. So certain people on the team can do certain tasks, or some people can do all the tasks. It just depends. We're going to set it to an active state. We're going to assign it out to the website area. It's already assigned to iteration 2. And now we're going to put in our time. We're saying that we have a remaining time of 8 hours. This is my effort in terms of hours on tasks. I can also track my originals for reporting purposes. So maybe I said there's 10 original hours and we've completed 2 and we have 8 remaining. What's nice is, okay, the downside of this is the developer or user, whoever's working on this item, has to manually update that information. Okay? It doesn't automatically do it for you. The upside to doing all that is from your reporting perspective. If a manager or somebody above, or dev lead, somebody wants to see this information and see how well are we tracking, how well are we estimating? We're saying we have 30 hours of work, but we're doing it in 20. I want to know that. And the only way to know that is to get reporting on it. And the only way to get that reporting is to update this information. So developers may find it like very much of a nuisance, but at the same time, if they look at it from a perspective of the manager, even if you do it at the end of the day and keep track of what you worked on that day, or when you close the item out for the day, whatever, it's going to benefit the team in the long run, because not only are you going to be able to estimate your hours better, but now your velocity is changing, because maybe your effort of 2 was really an effort of 1 at the time you got done with it. You just thought it was a 2 because you thought it was going to take you, 9 hours, when in actuality it took you 4, so. Especially young teams just getting on their feet, a lot of times that will be the case.
Well, quick question about hours.
Sure.
So the original estimate is what you put in before you start working on the feature. The day after day you work on it, you update the remaining, and then the completed is what actually took you to do it?
No, let's go back and look at that. You actually update all 3, or up 2. So what I'll do is I'll come in with 10.00. I'll work on it for day 1. I completed 2 hours, and I'll turn my 10 down. I'll put in 8 in remaining. Then tomorrow I come in and I work on it for an hour, and now I'm there.
Okay, so you got to do the math in your head.
You got to do the math in your head, yes. So like I say, it can be tedious for a developer, and they may not want to do it, but in the overall ecosystem, it really, really does help. So I try to encourage teams to do it. I wish it was more of an updated process, you know, but it's not. And so it is what it is. So that's how I manage that the tasks. I can go in here and add a task. So, you know, this is going to call task 1, and we're going to assign this out to, let's say, Brian Keller. And it's new, and it's iteration 2. Let's give it to the database work here, and we're going to give it an original estimate of 5 hours. And now we have our task associated with it. So it's pretty straightforward. Again, I can customize the columns. I can email it out. So it'll actually take and email that iteration backlog out if I choose to. Again, you have to be tied up to an email server. The other thing here we have is capacity. So every iteration has capacity. How much work can you actually do in a particular iteration? Not everybody works 8 hours a day. It's just not real. Maybe some people do work 20 hours a day. I mean, you know, who knows? But the reality is you don't work the full time that you're sitting at your desk. You have meetings, you have other things. So we're going to say that most people work on an average of about 6 hours. Now, if you watch the left side here, the right side here, you can see that it's starting to build out this little graph. Let's say Annie works 5 and Adam works 5. And let's say they have a team day off for whatever. Let's put it at the 10th to the 10th. So they got a team day off, so you can decide, okay, the team's got a holiday, whether it be Thanksgiving in the US, you know, some other countries have other holidays. You can put that in there and track that information. And again, individual days off. So maybe somebody's going on vacation for a week. So maybe Adam is going on vacation, or let's say Annie's going on vacation for a week, and she was gone from the 4th to the 10th, let's say, or the 4th to the 7th. Let's do it that way. So she's got 4 days off. So I go up there and save it. Now I can go back to my backlog. I see some of my activities by activity, it's who it's assigned to. The other thing I have is my board. So now on my board, I basically have the user story or the product backlog item and the tasks. This is where I work on a daily basis as a leader of a team. I want to sit down every morning during my sprint planning or my scrum meeting and my stand-up, and I want to sit down and I want to see who's doing what, where they're at, you know, all that good stuff that we ask. So what I can see is that, okay, Brian, what are you doing? Well, today I'm going to work on this task here, and that's currently active. All these are currently active. I finished this one yesterday, so we're going to put it over here, and we're going to zero out the hours. And then I'm going to take this one here from Annie, and we're going to close out her item, and we're going to zero out the hours. Now, it should zero out by default, but it doesn't seem to be doing it. Now, if I open that up, one of the things you'll see is remaining is 0. But nothing else is going to get updated. So let me see if I can find one let's close out this one. Oh, actually, I didn't assign hours. Let's go over here and say that we have 3 hours working on that. We're going to assign this one out to a different user. So let's assign it out to Annie. Now when I bring it over here and close it, let's see if it'll have original estimate in there. I don't know if it will or not. Yeah, see, I had 2 there. It didn't show the 2 originally. See, there's some wonkiness with the update. So really it had 5, but what it's doing is saying 2, so I have to go in and put my completed. Again, it's a manual process. It's never meant to be time tracking, never was designed that way, but I think it should be done a little bit better, but it is what it is. You can also group it by people or by story. So I can see all the work that an individual's working on. This is the view I go to during my stand-up every morning. Is I'll go through my stand-up and I'll say, okay, Annie, what are you working on today? What did you work on yesterday? What are you going to do today? And what are your impediments? She's going to go through and talk about her stuff on the board. We're going to make adjustments where necessary if she hasn't done that already. And we're going to move on to Cameron. And we're going to go through our list of people and we're going to talk about the things we need to talk about. We're going to get through our meeting real quick and be done and update the board. It might be a little longer than 15 minutes depending on the size of your team, but I do it this way because I want to keep the system updated. So I don't just want to talk, but I want this up on a monitor if I can help it, or somewhere where people can see it and we can talk to it. So we can make those changes as necessary. And again, we can see future iterations or past iterations. So I can go back and see what's been worked on. Again, I can look at the board, and the board's not showing me anything because it's resolved or it's being goofy. And I can see capacity if any was set. And again, I can go on to my iteration 3 and see if anything's been assigned out there yet. Of course, nothing has. I can always go back here and start to assign stuff out to iteration 3. Doing that. And so there we've started to put our stuff in iteration 3, and we can go, and again, there's some tasks already assigned to some of that work and things like that. Any questions about any of that so far? Okay. The one thing I want to do is I want to go back and I want to show you the alerting real quick. So originally you had My Alerts in TFS. Okay, you didn't have this thing called Team Alerts. So My Alerts have things like your work item alerts, your build alerts, things like that. So if I go to new build alert, I might say, build fails. Well, that's great, but then every person that I want to get this email is going to have to subscribe to this alert, which doesn't make sense to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my team alert, and I'm going to say every time a build fails, assign it out to the team members and the default email addresses of those team members that are in the system. And now, every time a build fails, my whole team receives that alert. And they know, bang, something's happened, we got to go in there, because the whole team should be able to triage that particular incident. But there are some personal alerts that I like to sign out, or subscribe to, I should say. And that is, a change is made to a work item that's assigned to me. What this means is that every time, whether somebody assigns you a task or a work item of any type originally, so they create a new one, they assign it to you, you will get notified that somebody just assigned you work through email. So you don't have to be looking in TFS constantly to see, okay, what am I supposed to be working on? It sends me the email with the work item in the body of it and a link to TFS that says, okay, here's what was just assigned to you. And then if it's updated throughout the course of the iteration or the project, again, an email is sent to me, so I don't have to track it in TFS. It's being sent to me. I know what I need to work on, and I go from there. And I love that alert. I always subscribe to it when I'm working on a project. Again, it's going to pick up your email address if you have one in the system. Of course, I'm not tied to an email server. I don't have one. But again, what it's basically saying is it's going to send anything to me that's been changed in a particular work item I'm assigned to. So that's a good one to do. Again, there's code review alerts. For developers, if you're interested in code reviews, things like that. If you're not familiar with it, TFS has a code review work item in it that you can then track your code reviews as work items in TFS, which is great because you can go back and forth collaboratively working on these things. No more sitting in a room with a projector and a pad and paper or laptop. You just kind of go through and review as necessary, and it's all tracked. Okay, so we've gone through a sprint. Let's go back to our slides and see what else we needed to talk about here. We did that. We did the sprint planning. We broke them down. We committed. So some of the things we have to determine in an iteration as a team is, what is our definition of done? Everybody needs a definition of done. Okay, and in 2015, you're going to be able to assign a definition of done to each iteration. It's not available in 2013, but in 2015 TFS, you'll be able to assign a definition of done in a particular iteration you're going to run. So we have to know, what does it mean to be done here? So always having that. And again, having our daily stand-ups. Super important. Again, these are not TFS concepts. These are concepts in the Scrum or Agile world that teams should follow. And I see when I go into organizations and work with their teams, their definition of done is very obscure. It's not very defined. And again, if it's not defined, that's okay. But trying to work towards a good defined definition of done is going to benefit your team immensely. The reason being is what definition of done does is it stops you from having work that you don't know is complete or not. So you don't know, should I continue to work on something or not? One of the killers of an iteration is not knowing what I'm supposed to be working on, or is it finished yet? So there's really two things. The one is the definition of done, the other one is unplanned work. So as a Scrum Master, your Scrum Master should be, or your Agile Master, or whoever is running your team, should be your liaison to the organization saying, listen, we're not going to bring more work in here. Even though Bill, the CIO, says, I need this done by next week, your response to Bill is put it on the backlog. Now that can be really, in theory, great. It doesn't work in concept all the time. I understand that. And I've been in organizations, I know how it works. But if the organization starts to see results because you don't have unplanned work and how hard unplanned work can affect your team, maybe they'll start to change their perception of what they're doing, and how things work. But it's always good to stop unplanned work as soon as you can and get a definition of done. So let's complete an iteration. So what does completing an iteration mean? So we've gone through, we've written our code, we set up our database, we built our website, we got some great Angular stuff out there, we got the latest database stuff going. It means we're going to deliver something potentially shippable software, an increment. It's something that we're going to deliver. Now, a lot of times I'll start a new project. If it's a new project or I'm coming onto it new, I'll start with what I call my sprint zero. And my sprint zero is basically things like setting up infrastructure, because it's not really potentially shippable. It leads to potentially shippable stuff, but it has to be done. It has to be considered. It has part of the project. So I set up my sprint zero and I say, okay, I'm going to set up my infrastructure. I'm going to make sure that everybody's got the right tooling that they need. Everything's good to go, so that way we can start to deliver some value. Then once we're done and we have our potentially shippable piece of software, we then go and we demo that value to the organization. Now, people call it a sprint demo. It's really not a demo. It's a sprint review, okay? If you're going by the book, it's called a sprint review. And in a sprint review, you go through and you talk about what you've done. You can show and demo what you've done, but it's not considered, if you look at the book, it's actually a sprint review. Then you go and you perform your retrospective. So how many folks here that use Agile do retrospectives? Really? That's great. That's awesome, because I don't see hardly anybody do them when I talk to people. They're like, yeah, we should. It'll be a good thing, but yeah, so you know what a retrospective is. It's where can we improve? What did we do well? What did we not do not so well, or where can we improve? I don't like to say not well or bad. Some people use those terms. I like to say, where did we do well? Where can we improve? And how can we? What's the plan to get there? And then start to prepare for that next iteration with that plan in mind, and apply what we've learned each time. Because again, we're always evolving and growing as we're doing this development journey, and so it's always good to look at what we've done and move on. Some other end activities are we clear the iteration backlog, deliver that to our customers, that increment to our customers, so make sure our customers get it in their hands, they're using it, they're liking it. Make sure we go through the backlog and clean up any items. So clean up those completed items, identify any new backlog items that need to be, and start to prioritize for the next particular iteration that we're going to work on. And then again, the retrospective of what the team did the previous iteration. So we looked at most of that, talked to some of that. So in summary, we have things like teams and TFS. We have the alerting mechanism, which again is team focused also now. We saw how you plan a release, how you prioritize, estimate, how you plan the iteration, how you run that iteration, and how you complete that iteration. Again, in TFS, there is no real work item for retrospective. There was in previous versions of a Scrum template that was out there, but they no longer have that, so we don't really track our retrospectives in TFS. I'm on the fence with that one. I think it should be tracked in TFS as a work item, because historically I want to go back and see what did we say. So what I do is I take and I create a storyboard. So Storyboarding is a way in which PowerPoint connects into TFS. And I can go and I create a PowerPoint presentation, and I have 3 different slides. You know, what went well, where can we improve, and what's our plan? I then take and I create a work item at the end of each one, and I sign it, and I call it my retrospective work item. And I attach that storyboard to the work item. Now, the downside to that storyboard has to exist on an HTTP path in your organization. It can't be a UNC path at this time. So it has to be like in SharePoint or somewhere in a cloud-provided environment where you have an HTTP path or HTTPS path to that particular, but that's how I do mine. Works well with my teams that I've done it with, and it gives you a way to store your information and track that information and go back and look at that information in one central location. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know we have a few more minutes, but I would like to give time for questions and answers. Again, thank you all for coming and attending. I really appreciate your time today. There is my contact information. Again, paul.hacker@agilethought.com. I have cards if you're interested. Twitter, PJ Hacker. Yes?
I have a question about the store's features task level, right?
Yep.
Features are 30,000 foot level.
Mm-hmm.
Stores would be then 10,000 foot level.
Yes.
Tasks would be just what you're doing right now, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if you set up a story in there, but those are, have the ability to be looked at just on their own, and then you can drill down just like you can with features and tasks?
Yeah, so if we go back to the image, hopefully it'll still show great. So we can look at the stories right here, and this shows me a list of all my particular stories that I have.
Real quick, can you give like a summary of the question so we can get it?
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. So the question was, features are at a very high level, 50,000 foot. Stories are then at a 20,000 foot. Tasks are what you're currently working on. Can you see all the stories in one particular location? If that's what I mean. Okay. Yeah, so I click on my stories node, and I can see all the stories that are currently in the system for this particular project.
And then the features, though, so if we click on those,
I would see a list of all the features in my particular project. Yes. So I could add a new feature. If it'll let me add it. There it goes. And then I see my features. But one of the things I can do is I can view features to stories. And let me go back to my features real quick here. And I'm sorry, go features to stories. And I could show it that way too. Now, I have to assign that particular feature to that story to that feature. And once I do, and I believe I can just, it used to be able to do it right here, but I'm not seeing the link for it. They may have changed it in the update. I should be able to just drag it up and associate it with a feature, but it doesn't seem to be letting me. But yeah, you would see your stories to features in that kind of hierarchy. Yep, yep. Any more questions?
That's controlled through XML?
Pardon me?
You're able to configure that through XML?
No, you're not. So it's configured how it is, and you can't change the configuration of this. But if you're talking the feature, the question is, can I control that through XML, configure it through XML? When you ask that, you mean the features and stories list? Yes, you can control that through XML. So there are a couple of files, and it's on MSDN. And what you would do is you would go and you would export a common config file, x.xml, and the categories.xml file. You would go in and you would just basically copy and paste a couple of sections, change some verbiage from features to goals or initiatives or whatever, change the color in the bottom. It has a little color thing, pick the 000 color, and then it will show up in your list here when you import it back into. So you use a tool called the WIT admin tool. And the WIT admin has, if you go WIT admin /$, it'll list out all its abilities. You export common configuration, and then import common configuration, export categories, import categories. It's real. They work interchangeably. So in terms of once I export the categories, I'm done. I just go back and I change from export to import and push it back in. I don't have to rechange the command line switches or anything like that. It's real straightforward. Like you could probably do it in 25 minutes and have it set up the way you'd like it. Yeah. All right, if that's it, then I'd like to, again, thank you all for coming, and hope you have the rest of a good day.